Why most successful startups are one decision away from collapse. Most startups don't fail when things are going badly. They fail when things are going well. Revenue is growing. Customers are signing. The product is working. And that's exactly when the most dangerous decisions get made. Not because founders become reckless, but because success quietly changes how risk is perceived. This video isn't about fragile startups. It's about successful ones. The kind that look stable right before they break. Success shrinks the margin for error. Early-stage startups are allowed to be wrong. Customers expect rough edges. Investors expect pivots. Teams expect chaos. But once a startup becomes successful, expectations harden. Revenue targets appear. Headcount grows. Customers depend on uptime. Partners build around you. Ironically, success reduces flexibility. And that's where collapse risk increases. Because now, one decision doesn't just affect survival. It affects reputation, trust, and momentum, which changes how decisions are made. The first illusion. We know what works now. Early on, founders test everything. They question assumptions. They experiment aggressively. They adapt quickly. But once something works, that behavior changes. The company forms a story about itself. This is our market. This is our customer. This is our edge. The story becomes strategy, and strategy becomes identity. At that point, decisions stop being evaluated on evidence alone. They're evaluated on whether they fit the story. That's when logic quietly loses power. The second illusion, stability equals safety. As revenue grows, risk tolerance drops. Not officially, but psychologically. A decision that could cost 10% of revenue now feels existential, even if the company could survive it. So founders and operators begin optimizing for stability rather than resilience. They avoid pricing changes, structural refactors, product simplification, market exits. Not because these are bad moves, but because they introduce visible uncertainty. The company becomes calm on the surface, rigid underneath, and rigidity is fragile. How collapse actually happens. Collapse is rarely dramatic. It doesn't start with a bad quarter. It starts with a misjudged trade-off. A decision that makes sense locally but damages the system globally. Examples look like this. Chasing enterprise deals that distort the roadmap. Adding features to protect churn instead of fixing fundamentals. Hiring ahead of clarity to keep up with growth. Locking into infrastructure that can't adapt later. Each decision is defensible in isolation. The danger is cumulative. The system becomes complex, slow, and expensive to change. At that point, one more decision is enough to tip it. The role of incentives in collapse. Most collapse decisions aren't made by bad actors. They're made by rational people responding to incentives. Founders are incentivized to show momentum. Operators are incentivized to reduce volatility. Managers are incentivized to avoid visible failure. So decisions bias toward short-term optics, predictability, narrative continuity. But startups don't die from one bad metric. They die when incentives reward preserving the appearance of success over preserving adaptability. That's the quiet failure mode. The one decision is usually predictable. When collapse finally happens, people say it came out of nowhere. It didn't. The decision that triggers collapse is usually one of these. Taking capital that forces unnatural growth. Committing to a customer segment that controls roadmap priorities. Overbuilding systems before constraints are understood. Scaling a team faster than decision clarity. What makes it dangerous is timing. Early stage, the same decision might be survivable. Late stage, it's irreversible. Because the organization has lost its ability to absorb shock. Why B2B startups are especially vulnerable. B2B startups often look healthier than they are. Revenue is predictable. Contracts are long-term. Customers seem sticky, but that stability can mask structural risk. A few large customers can distort incentives. Custom work can quietly replace product strategy. Sales velocity can hide product fragility. Everything works until one assumption breaks. A major customer churns. A platform dependency changes. A sales channel dries up. At that point, the company discovers it optimized for growth, not durability. Solo founders and operators miss this too. Solo founders often assume collapse is a scale problem. It's not. The same pattern appears in smaller systems. Solo founders overcommit to one revenue source, delay hard architectural decisions, build around personal strengths instead of system needs. Operators optimize local efficiency, defer uncomfortable changes, protect metrics instead of fundamentals. The scale is different. The mechanism is the same. The real risk is not failure. It's irreversibility. Early mistakes are cheap. Late mistakes are locked in. The most dangerous decisions are the ones that reduce optionality, increase dependency, add complexity without leverage. They don't feel risky at the time. They feel responsible. That's why successful startups are often one decision away from collapse. Not because they're weak, but because they're constrained. The quiet test for founders and operators. Here's the test most teams never run. If this decision turns out to be wrong, how hard is it to undo? Early stage answers. Painful but possible. Late stage answers. Catastrophic. That's the difference between growth and fragility. Final observation. Most startups don't collapse because they stop being smart. They collapse because success changes what feels safe. And once safety replaces adaptability as the primary goal, the system becomes brittle. At that point, collapse doesn't require a series of mistakes. Just one.